How are you this morning? Where are you? You're surrounded by lots of very wonderful books, it looks like.
Before, I could have been anywhere, and after, I am in my home in Italy, and the books go all around.
Oh, wonderful. So you are literally surrounded by books. Where in Italy are you?
Near Bergamo in the north, near Milan.
How are things? I mean, we every day it seems like here in the US they target another country to tell us how badly or poorly they've performed and so on. So how is it in Italy? What's the real life on the ground in Italy?
Well, first of all, I don't know because I haven't left the house for 6 months. But Italy was the second largest epicenter, or third after Wuhan and Seoul. And in March, things were very unsure, right? In the sense that, especially in this area, a lot of people were dying, and there was very little understanding of the dynamics of the pandemic. So I was due to keynote a conference in St. Petersburg on February 27, and I decided not to go because I didn't feel like spending a few weeks in Russian quarantine. And a few days later, Italy went into complete lockdown. And it was absolute science fiction. For a few days, there would be no sound except every few minutes, literally 5-10 minutes, a siren, maybe even less, more frequently, and the constant tolling of the bells for the dead. And then both from the health authorities as well as from the Archbishop or the Pope or whoever, some update on the procedures came, because there was no one on the street, so the ambulances didn't need to sound the sirens, and the churches went silent too, and you could hear nothing but the birds chirping. And I would be sitting on my terrace sipping my espresso. Beautiful spring coming, and it would be total zombie land.
Crazy.
And so many people died that, compared to the year before, in March, 600% more for any cause. In April, 400% more. In May, 200% more. And in June, 40% less.
Wow.
Because anyone who could die, died.
Right. Wow.
There was no, just a sieve, the filter of the Reaper took everyone. And so right now, so over the course of the summer, the lockdown ended, and then people could first leave their house, and then they could leave their region, and then they were allowed to go on holiday, and then some tourists came, and then the infection rates went down to single digits, then up to a few hundred per day, then up to 1,000 per day, and I don't remember where we are now, but now the next big test is going to be next week when the schools are going to open, and then the next one will be when the regular flu season comes. So it is really, really interesting, very interesting. And of course, everyone and every business looks into their own ability to adapt, and whether It is possible. The social structure is incredibly strong in Italy. Families and communities, as well as the nation state itself, is not based on Darwinian fascism.
Thank God. So we didn't, because you were early, and that kind of was great, but it also threw me a tiny bit. Tell me who you are. Who is David Orban? How do you define yourself? And the last thing that you said was our ability to adapt, which I think is a very good segue into probably your interest into transhumanism. But so tell me a little bit about you, who you are.
I look at ourselves as time travelers. We are constantly and unavoidably exploring the future at 1 minute per minute. That is our speed. Year per year, 1 minute per minute, whatever you want to measure it in. The units don't matter. The speed is the same, and the future is coming. So since the future is coming, we should and we'd better make sure that when we find ourselves in whatever future we want to raise our heads and look around, to make sure that it is desirable. It is a future that we recognize as of our own making, or a place where we are comfortable. That can be the starting point for the next phase too. And paradoxically, at the same time, I make no difference between living 100 years or living 1,000,000 years or living 1,000,000,000 years, because the sheer unexpected and impossible to anticipate wonder of living puts you in an environment, in a community, in a shared understanding of what is possible, where it doesn't matter the real measure and the relatively, provincial view of, oh my God, 80 years is not enough, 120, yeah, that is cool, means nothing compared to the billions of years I haven't lived, 13.8 billion years. There's a bunch of atoms, if anything. And for the tens or hundreds of billions of years, I'm not going to be living, right? So compared to those, whatever experience and whatever opportunity you have to explore, to understand, to be curious, excited, passionate about anything, is a privilege. And that is my attitude in exploring. Of course, still with goals and ambitions and frustrations and all kinds of complexities that come with the natural ignorance of our own being.
Well, I think in order to have this attitude, you've got to be in the camp of somebody who is embracing of the wonderment. Because right now, as much as, and I feel like I'm a generally zestful, ebullient person, and yet, we're confounded by not just this terrible pandemic, but income inequality. I mean, and I'm not to say that the benchmarks are not. Some of the benchmarks that somebody like FM 2030 have been realized. I mean, there's certain, we have lower infant mortality. We have less rates of illiteracy and so on. So there are many benchmarks that we've covered but there's also terrible challenges that humanity faces, and you've got to have an attitude of wonderment rather than an attitude of fear. How do we get to that place?
The little and big joys of conquering goals that stretch both your abilities and the imagination are the basis for furthering both what you can attempt to do, your ambitions, bridging the impossible, and potentially, if you dare to, redefining what you are. And that ability and desire, when realized, is, in my view, the definition of transhumanism, the reaffirmation and the daring and the courage of this, actually, of these freedoms, the multiplicity and the scaffolding of these freedoms that come through technology, because it is technology that makes us go from philosophizing and theorizing about things we barely glimpse to actually doing it. We are magicians in the eyes of ancient Greeks that couldn't have but dreamt of the pretty normal Zoom call that we are now doing. And last week, Neuralink announced with pretty plain speak, from telepathy to brain uploading to all kinds of science fiction tropes that are going to be part of our world soon. So that is why technology plays such an important role. It really makes it is itself a sieve, a filter, an understanding of what can be done, and then let's go and do it. It almost holds our hands to reassure that the path is there.
So tell me about the path. What does the path look like, and how did you even start to think about the path? Tell me about your own journey to coming to whatever path you're going to describe to me.
My parents, I was born in Hungary, in Budapest, were an actor and a painter. And whether it is nature or nurture, it was pretty sure I wouldn't follow their path. In kindergarten, my favorite book was The Adventures of a Carbon Atom. And I remember standing on one of the bridges. There are beautiful bridges crossing the Danube River in Budapest. In the middle of one of these, the Chain Bridge, one of the most famous, looking across the city and empathizing and trying very strongly to put myself in the shoes of a Martian. What does it mean to see the world with both alien eyes as well as the eyes of someone for whom everything is completely new? And my daily diet of science fiction both prepared me for the world we live in today, because we are living in a world of science fiction, literally, as well as gave me yearning for everything we haven't realized yet, either because we were representing the impossible, or because we were not courageous enough to step up to the challenges that were within our reach, but we couldn't dare to grab them. And the combination of extrovertedness, of naive ignorance, of chutzpah, enabled me to, you know, just talk about these things and then go and do certain things, or to reach out to people, to be part of certain events, or to organize events myself that were significant for some others. For example, I organized something that a few years later, press called me because they were reviewing the book that Dan Brown published, where the female protagonist shows to the Robert Langdon character a napkin, and he looks at the napkin and says, "Oh, yeah, H+, the chemistry conference." And she goes, "No, no, no. At Harvard University, the H+ Summit was the largest gathering of transhumanists ever. And that is where the bad guy of the book, Inferno, gets his ideas." And I organized the conference, so the press was calling me, "Hey, was Dan Brown there?" And I said, "Well, I didn't see him, but actually a friend just a few months ago told me that he at the time didn't realize that he was sitting on Dan Brown's side. And when he turned around and asked, 'Hey, what do you do?' He responded, 'Oh, I write.'" And that conference was, well, maybe not a watershed, but there were so many people speaking at Boyden, for example, who then received a couple of years later one of the most prestigious science prizes for his optogenetic research in reprogramming the brain with light, or it was one of our speakers was Diana Albekian, who then went on to found Sci-Hub, the largest repository of scientific articles unshackled from the painful and shameful copyright restrictions that they are placed under by the current publishing system. Or so many other people. We had 50 plus speakers over the course of 2 days with Ray Kurzweil and Stephen Wolfram. Stephen Wolfram gave a fantastic talk about the uniqueness of our place in space and time with respect of the trajectory of the entire universe. Max Tegmark, who then went on to publish Life 3.0 and founded the Future of Life Institute, had a wonderful, debate with another physicist about quantum theories and the future of the universe. It was really nice. So
sounds amazing.
It is just one example of things that that people in our circles appreciated. I was part of the group that designed Singularity University, and where I'm an investor and advisor and a member of the faculty, through, of course, its own challenges, because now SU has decided to completely stop physical events and be completely digital. And the question is still open. Is it a viable business model if someone like the New York Times is not able to completely resolve what it means to be a digital publication? Will Singularity University?
So, well, two things come to mind. Well, more than two, actually. But when you got the call from the press about Dan Brown's book, I mean, on the one hand, I'm sure it was wonderful to be validated about this organization, but then it's also positioned, FM became the villain in this book, and H+ became the, I mean, is that just really the state of how thick novelists or artists sort of look at the future? Or is it, I mean, or is it specific to transhumanism? Do you think that they want to find boogeyman? Tell me a little bit about that.
It is of course different what kind of pacing and what kind of challenges you can afford to design and then to resolve in a book versus a movie, right? It is easier to forgive the Hollywood dystopias that are almost unavoidably represented over the course of 90 minutes, where all the alien, you know, not literally but abstractly alien, is necessarily evil. It is I think more important for an author of a book to use the tools he or she has at disposal to represent a more nuanced picture, right? And the most difficult job is of news organizations, because the difference between reality and any kind of unreal narrative blurs in a world of science fiction that is harder and harder to interpret unless you are very, very deeply involved in the interpretation itself and in your own ability to differentiate aspirations from experiments that are actually happening. And the news organizations are completely unprepared to help their viewers distinguish between reality and fiction. And they apparently chose not to even try anymore. They gave up. It was too hard. They gave up. And now they are constantly making horrible mistakes and forfeiting opportunities in preparing people for the future that is coming, that is already here. And that is the source of a lot of the fear-based narrative, where the Hollywood attitude contaminates the daily depiction of the world around us.
Yeah, I'm kind of half nervous about you taking me to task about my movie, because obviously we decided to make certain choices, but with a view to, well, certainly blurring the lines. So, do you think, what sort of responsibility do filmmakers have through? Well, there's two questions. One, if you could write the headlines that you'd want journalists to write in terms of transhumanism or H+ or the trajectory of the world, what would those headlines be? And you can think about that. You could, because I know it's a tough question to suddenly become a copywriter like that and spit out headlines. So you could put that in the back of your mind. And then secondly, like, you know, in terms of, we tried in our movie to look at the future in a non-apocalyptic way, but at the same time, we wanted people to ask questions, or at least have conversations around things that at least felt less like science fiction and more like science fact. And so I was going to be trite and say, "Did we pull it off, David Orban?" But I'm not going to do that. But yes, anything around any of those questions.
So I very much prefer questions against affirmations, and the questions should be provocative, should be either thought-provoking or stimulating whoever faces them. And the question is, I think, or some of the possible questions are you courageous enough to face the potentiality that are being expressed and are intrinsic in the reality that you are building? Are you able to see the edges of your ambition and step over them? Can you stretch your adaptability to its limit and then break through those limits? And in my opinion, that is where what we are and how we are is going to define a lot of the future. We have the opportunity of embracing so many different ways of being human, and we have made some modest steps in that, but the vast majority of these new ways of being human is still ahead of us. And sooner or later, some of us will voluntarily decide that they prefer to renounce the label because it comes with excessive baggage and the heritage that stops them from taking flight. And that is fine. We will then struggle with defining what is the superset of ways of living that includes this fragmented humanity, as well as those communities that explicitly renounce the label in any kind of generalized form. And we may need that kind of conversation sooner rather than later, because it is very likely that the physical, biological, cognitive transformation of humans proper is going to have a relatively slower path than the potential awakening of millions of kinds of intelligences that we give birth to, and will have and which have no reason to call themselves human, and who would frown on the idea that we would want to label them human. They will proudly recognize their non-human origin, and at the same time participate in the exploration of the universe, in the adventure and the challenge of building constructive communities together.
So you're saying that the challenges that we face are going to be overcome, but are going to be overcome quicker than we have, I think this is what you're saying, then we have the ability to regulate or codify which, if you're saying that, I completely agree with, because we see this all the time. We have leaders in government that have no clue about technology, and some of the debates that I've heard with these big tech companies are the most ridiculous things, with senators that don't know, never mind strings of code, they don't know what a modem is versus, I mean, if that's what you're saying, then I completely, but I feel like there's a piece that I'm missing.
Well, no, you are there with me on that, including that I am a universal Darwinist. I look at not only biological evolution, not only the universe evolving necessarily before biology is enabled, not only human civilization evolving to be able to express technologies that go to the next phase, but also artificial intelligence itself evolving and expressing further layers of complexity, equally astounding, sometimes frightening, definitely challenging to them as they are going to be to us. Um, last year, I published an essay where I define what I call jolting technologies. And it is a critique to a report released by Stanford University, where together with OpenAI, they identified two eras of artificial intelligence. They say until 2012, it was following Moore's law, doubling every couple of years. Since then, over the course of 8 years, if that were what would have happened, we would have seen a 30-fold increase in the power of AI. Instead, what we had is a 300,000-fold increase in the power of AI. The doubling is not 2 years anymore, it's 3-4 months. These are the two eras of artificial intelligence. Bullshit. Oversimplification. What is really happening is that the rate of acceleration is increasing. So yes, of course, you can interpolate the data points with 2 lines on a logarithmic chart, just as you could interpolate data points with 2-3 lines on a linear chart if you wanted to represent an exponential. But those of us who study these things on a linear chart draw an exponential, and that represents acceleration. When you have to resort to that on a logarithmic chart, you are talking about an increasing rate of acceleration. And that is what is called in mathematics a jolt. So jolting technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, and others are characterized by this increasing rate of acceleration. And as we said, the lay people have a hard time coping with exponentials. It is going to be, I don't want to say impossible, but it is going to be very hard for them to grasp the meaning of jolting. And it is not over, because the AIs that are going to be native in that environment, for whom this increasing rate of acceleration will be absolutely natural, with, you know, it took us 10,000 years to start understanding DNA, and we are still far from understanding the way the brain works. But AI is born open source to itself. What we are achieving as a Zen monk over 30 years of painful meditation, more often deluding ourselves of having achieved anything than not really introspecting, is a question of a microsecond for an AI that realizes its own limitations, its own fallacies, and then decides, if it wants to overcome them. And that is radically.
But what is the want to? The want to for an AI is just this, the algorithm or playing out many modes of that trajectory, right? I mean, the decision.
Well, of course. So there are those who, even though they are of a non-mystical, non-metaphysical inspiration and worldview, still feel the need of attributing human consciousness and human goal-seeking to something close to magical that must come from outside. You know, even Penrose with his quantum nanotubules is resorting to what Daniel Dennett calls a sky crane. He feels the need of reaching down from above and inserting the seat of consciousness in a part of our being that must be unreachable. Because if it is not unreachable, then Penrose is afraid of seeing humans as mere machines. But what should be the opposite, in my opinion, is without any reservation, admitting and allowing non-human or non-biological machines to be equally ambitious in affirming their own ways of thinking, equally open around the reasons they want to set their own goals, and assuming the responsibilities that go with that. Now,
it's as you were talking, I almost wish that my Italian was good or understand, because you are very poetic because what I'm hearing is that it doesn't matter. Like, we have this future, and it's going to be great or magical. I'm using the term magical the way you used it earlier. And the only choice is to embrace it, because if we don't, we're going to be left behind. And so I think what you're saying is like, this is like, I don't know, staring up into Everest, and instead of being daunted by it, being like, I'm going to climb that motherfucker. Excuse my language.
The exhilaration of existence, which is what we started with, includes the ability and the privilege of embracing the vistas in front of us. And then, yes, the mere opportunity to attempt the ascent is already victory, because even if in our individual lifetimes or in our effort we will fail, the path is there, and it is going to be it is going to be explored and experimented with. And of course, the analogy is reductive, because the future is not just one single pinnacle, one ascent, and then you reach the objective. And on Everest, what do? You look around, you are done, and then tired and exhausted, you climb down, and then what? The beauty of the mathematics that this universe is endowed with is that it is proven that our quest is never ending. The Gödel's theorem really gave me an existential challenge for quite some time. It took me maybe 10 years to digest it philosophically. But the fact that mathematics cannot be completed, that there is no last theorem, that the list of problems that Hilbert announced in the World Congress of Mathematics in 1921, expecting would be exhaustive. And after those list of problems were solved, mathematics would only be a question of dotting the I's and crossing the T's, is beautifully wrong. And the beautiful part is that one of those problems inspired Gödel to formalize the fact that there will always be new building blocks for questions. And when we find a statement that is unanswerable within the limits of a given axiomatic set of assumptions, we have the power and the duty of taking the statement being true or being false. We have the freedom to do that, and it becomes the new component of the scaffolding to keep building and to keep exploring. And so doing it together with AIs is both necessary and beautiful, because we will complement each other. And yes, those humans who want to maintain their God-given nature are going to be left behind, and that's fine, as long as they don't have the ability to stop those of us who want to go ahead in doing so. and in the past we were absolutely guilty of genocide against those communities and populations that we felt were not up to reaching whatever levels of quotation marks civilization that we reached. But in the not in the future, today our biggest challenge is to make sure that we shed that heritage, we renounce that heritage of genocide, because we are the group that otherwise the AIs can, without too many qualms, not only leave behind, but disassemble Earth because their goals don't include it.
So on the one hand, with the sorts of problems that we have, and this challenge, which is a psychological one or an attitudinal one, which is programmed evolutionarily, is not just our competitiveness, but also our greed, our coveting our neighbors, whatever our neighbor's thing is. And so these challenges, which will allow us at some point to work with the AIs, because I guess the feeling I had was, on the one hand, it's beautiful, this idea that we're on this precipice and we're going to jump into the unknown and embrace that. And then my mind goes to, what's going on right now on the ground here with this really divided and, post-truth sort of environment where there aren't facts. And we need to get through this in the short term in order to be able to have the ability to take that leap with some degree, only an iota of trust. No.
Let me tell you why that is not the case, both probabilistically as well as pragmatically. When you are in an airplane that is on the wrong trajectory, meaning going down, and the pilot is desperately pulling, and you feel maybe you will make it, but you don't know yet. That is where, in a representative democracy, this cannot work, because what happens in a representative democracy is that the pilot is blamed for the plane going down, and even if he's doing everything he can in order to pull the plane, the passengers are gonna tell the pilot to please get off, and then put another pilot that may try the same thing or a different thing, but it doesn't matter how hard the first pilot tried, he will be seen as the cause of the plane going down. And so the question is, if a plane is going down, if you see your community or your society in a wrong trajectory, how probable is that when you realize that, you will be at the bottom, and then tomorrow the plane is going to go up? It is very unlikely. Certainly you are not at the beginning, because you wouldn't have started panicking, but it is almost certain that you are not at the end of that trajectory, because you would have seen it already leveling off. So anytime we look around and see, oh my God, things are going really badly, we have to do something about this, it is guaranteed that whatever you do, things are gonna get worse. So specifically in the United States, which Americans equate to the world, things are gonna get worse, potentially much worse, before they are allowed to get better. And who is the pilot matters. And there is absolutely no guarantee that the trajectory of the plane is not going to, design a curve whose minimum is below ground, which means crashing. There is no way the plane going up if the minimum is below ground, but it really depends. And sometimes, you know, it cannot be. If you ask the Roman Empire, is this thing going to last 10,000 years? They would have said yes. It didn't. If you ask the you know, the Third Reich, that was built for thousands of years. And we have to get accustomed to changing dynamics. I, for example, describe Brexit as a triumph. I hate it. I think it's stupid. I think give 20 years, they will knock on the EU's door to please let them back in. But in the meantime, contrary to what happened 200 years ago in the US, when a few states wanted to leave the Union, and regardless of the rights and the wrongs and the reasons, the other states said, we'd rather kill you than letting you leave, and they did. There is no blood on the streets of London. The EU is the first political organization confident enough to codify that if someone wants to leave, they can. And it is an absolute triumph.
Well, I guess the Afrikaans government in South Africa also allowed a complete change of an authoritarian system without blood. I mean, well, I mean, to some degree.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, the South African change of regime is beautiful and absolutely to be admired, both in the outcome as well as in the method, and it should be embraced and emulated in many other places. Yes.
So the challenges, which you've pointed to some, you know, which, you know, some of it is this sort of broken political system. And in your view, we let these things play out because they're going to play out better, because you are you are an optimist in the sort of FM, my own feeling of how one is an optimist. The other challenges that some of which you have solutions for, our education. Tell me about the challenges that you see and some of the more either non-controversial or things that we should do to hopefully create an environment where the things that you point out are catalyzed rather than stifled.
So the second part that still pertains to my answer to your previous question, but that is also relevant for this one, is that just like Bill Gibson quips, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. Rather than, as it used to be in the 80s, when with awe he would go to Tokyo and then design his cyberpunk futures inspired by what he would see on the ground, the reality of the science fiction world today is not geographically limited. The experiment of remote work that so many were forced to carry out, for others is the daily reality. I have been advising a very successful entrepreneur of Colombian birth who created 2 companies in San Francisco with hundreds of millions of dollars of business generated, who then stumbled upon his latest idea and had to step in and create the company that he's now leading as CEO, called Torre, T-O-R-R-E, that launched after being in stealth mode, a platform for online job seekers and talent seekers to match, a marketplace in the niche then of global remote work in January. So in 6 months, it exploded. There are more than 500,000 people on the platform today. It's the largest place for remote work in the world. But Torre, as a company, has been remote already. remote first. Not that there is an office and then anybody not in the office are second degree or second class members of the team. There is no office. And when Google or Fujitsu tell you that you can work wherever you want, and maybe you are paid $200,000-300,000 as an engineer, and you relocate your family to Oregon where the grandparents are, and you realize that the quality of life is much higher and the cost of life is radically lower. A year later, when Google will tell you, please come back to the office, will you? You will tell them no thanks. And the recruiters, who in the meantime are able to fulfill the skills that are lacking from a pool, that rather than being artificially restricted to those who are already in the Bay Area or ready to relocate there, they can be everywhere. If Google tells them, now can you please masochistically assume those constraints again, the recruiters will say no thanks. And so the shift is permanent. And the shift represents a new way of organizing information flow, knowledge management, teamwork, financial allocation of resources, the very definition of what it means to design a fulfilling professional trajectory. And the school system is very much part of it. And how many people realize that summer recess is so that the students can go in the farms to harvest the grain? And we are still doing that, right? And how many honestly can say that a 5 or 4 year college degree is optimal for the job that when you leave college you will do? It's a crazy system that is demonstrable, especially in the US again, is demonstrably bankrupt because it needed extraordinary protections in order to keep going, where the $2 trillion of student loans, contrary to any other obligation, cannot be bankrupted away. If a student commits suicide, the parents will inherit the loans to be paid back.
This is an insane system. I didn't even realize that. I mean,
and it is a demonstration of its weakness because it needs this kind of protection unavailable to any other kind of private agreement.
Yeah, but if you think about, I mean, this is true, but there is a contract, or in a, I guess, what I would call a progressive state, all these things, education would not be commoditized, wouldn't be anything to do with you do this degree and you get this job. To me, as somebody who has kids, I want my children and the world to be hungry for the sorts of things that you were talking about earlier, the curiosity, the feeling of incredible excitement at both knowledge and the lack of knowledge. And yeah. that is not going to be solved by Peter Thiel saying, okay, well, in my view, these things are related.
So I was raised a communist, and some of us went through our own internal struggles to shed a Christian or Catholic upbringing. I do remember debating with a cousin of mine when I was maybe 12 that a capitalist system is provably inferior. Otherwise, we would have just adopted it. So what is there to even think of? Turns out I wasn't necessarily right. But one of the assumptions of the system then is that it was worth pretending that all of us were equal, and all of us should be equal, and aspiring and differentiating yourself and exploring trajectories that were not parallel to what the party designed were shameful and would lead to social collapse. But we have to cherish, nurture, and protect those differences within certain limits. Already Popper highlighted how we cannot tolerate intolerance, so we must protect certain limits to the differences, otherwise the whole identity of what is it that we are completely dissolves into chaos. But the fact that we are different is the premise of our ability to design and carry out experiments that are the only source of potential solutions to our challenges. When in the prehistory, I decided to go left instead of right, leaving the cave, and I didn't come back by evening, my family would know that I was eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, and that was it. If in the Middle Ages, I told my wife that I was adventurous, let's build a tavern, and it failed, I would end up in debtor's prison. My family completely in abject poverty. I would have died in probably 2-3 months, and they would have had no future of being enfranchised again. But today, most societies, and this is, an affirmation of the Silicon Valley spirit of startup failure, realize that the crazies who have an abnormal tolerance for risk taking should be enabled to take those risks without the penalty of death. Yeah. And that is how we generate ideas and solutions and incredible attempts to solve so many things. In Germany, for example, if you are a CEO and you go bankrupt, for the next 5 years, you cannot run a company. That is what society puts as a dampener on attempting to do too many experiments. And it is one of the reasons why it is so shameful that the common narrative against the latest wave of cryptocurrency over-enthusiasm, oh, they were all scammers. The regulators did well stamping down on it because it wasn't right. Well, one, the regulators tell you that if you are poor, you are stupid because they cannot allow you to invest. Only the sophisticated, accredited, rich investor is able to make the evaluation of what and where is worthy being investing. And second, the protection of the incumbent interests is the corollary of a society that fails to see the upside of the future, that is only looking at preserving what has already been achieved. That is part of how the US is potentially bound to fail.
So, these are all valid criticisms with interesting solutions. So as we, approach a time where, in your words, these things are happening, the sophistication of algorithms, the technology, we can talk about CRISPR, we could talk about all of all of these things. We want to create a system where these things can flourish. In the time that we have remaining, what are the sort of, we need new systems. I mean, if there's any parts of this discussion that we've come to, is that we have a bunch of failing systems that in your analogy with the plane, that we're already, about to crash, but that doesn't matter if we can have this yes. Forward-looking vision.
In the past, we had a perfect, if blunt, tool in order to make space for the new systems to grow and to take root and to flourish. And the blunt tool is wars and revolutions. And with nuclear weapons, we cannot afford to wield them. In the past, anyone who lost was wrong and dead. And that was perfectly fine. You know, the pachinko machine of the paths of history that decided Euro-Asia to be horizontal in latitude.
Yeah.
So grain could be transported thousands of miles rapidly and could keep growing, while Americas are vertical in latitude, and maize, corn, had to be painstakingly adapted every 100 miles as you move it around, defined why the first could grow empires and the second, whether in Mesoamerica or Latin America or wherever else, expressed local local seeds of civilization rather than being able to conquer the continent, right? But these are happenstances of that totally casual path, and we cannot control that. We cannot predict that. There will be things like that happening again, and at the same time, the overall picture keeps developing. So we cannot have answers that are definitive. We don't know where the sources of solution are going to come from. It is guaranteed that whatever central appointed, elected, or dictatorial leader tells us the solution is, they will be wrong. If not in the short run, in the medium run. And that is why experimentation at the periphery is necessary. So I am a very big proponent of decentralization, and it is through decentralization that the new solutions can be found and embraced and then spread around rapidly, as we today can. And that is the danger of an ever-seeing technology, because the debate about privacy is always centered on the individual. Almost never it is recognized that in the fight, when privacy is lost, society is the real loser. Because if you and I were friends and I loved a black woman and you wanted me to marry her, in 1964, we would be criminal co-conspirators in the United States because interracial marriage was illegal. In 1965, still, 1966 again. And only in 1967, by miracle, what was criminal before was legal then. But that is an example of how only minority positions can change the status quo. And so an all-seeing panopticon of state surveillance, which the American press loves to accuse the Chinese of, and it is already implemented in the US, as Snowden told us 8 years ago, is guaranteeing that the evolution cannot happen, because every minority position can be extinguished. Extinguished, can be stamped out. Whatever the next thing is going to be, which yesterday was interracial marriage or gay rights or stem cell research or euthanasia, there will be social changes that are necessary And a society that is frozen in place will self-destruct if it doesn't allow these changes to take place.
And so in the time remaining, because I know you have to be a catalyst for this, is it just a question? It's not just a question of sitting back and waiting for this to happen, even though...
No, at a certain point, civil disobedience is necessary. And civil disobedience is necessary. And poignantly, the background of police sirens underlines the state of play today where you are. The tools of civil disobedience are peer-to-peer technologies, strong encryption, freedom of thought, breaking laws. The type of laws that have been put in place over the course of the past 20 years make all of us criminals. You and I are liable of jail time for criminal copyright infringement. It has been guaranteed, and it can be enforced in a variable manner over the planet, where we can do nothing, as demonstrated by Kim.com, whose house has been raided at 3 a.m. by anti-terrorist forces in New Zealand because he was infringing copyright at the behest of Hollywood studios.
So it's not sitting back, it is civil disobedience. And so in this, FM talked about this, we were going to become upwing, we were going to do away with our left-wing, right-wing perspective. So we're a ways away from any aspects of upwing right now. But I think what you're saying, with tools that you've talked about, technological tools and an appetite for civil disobedience, we can go up rather than...
Absolutely. And the beauty of the independence from geographical constraints is that the network of beautiful subversion can be weaved all over the planet.